most likely by Bartholomew, and you can read more about the origin of that portrait in my book. So where were the United Duchies? This is kind of a fuzzy map, but it shows the old outline of the Holy Roman Empire on the left, and on the right-hand side, we have a map, and if you look kind of, there's like that tannish gold color on the left, it's Nordrhein-Westfalen. Most of the territory that made up the Anna's kingdom or duchy or whatever you want to call it is in that tannish area. So this is zoomed in on that, and we can see the different properties. So we have kind of the light hatching is Gelders, and that's going to become very, very important during our conversation in a minute. Then you have Cleves in the middle and Raffenstein, and then you see the much bigger area of Jülich and Berg. And then you have Mark kind of off to the right and Raffensberg. So part of what happened, which I already mentioned when Johann married Maria, is it kind of unified all this territory. And that's a pretty big, serious chunk of territory in Western Germany. And you can see all the rivers that go through it. And when we're looking at this map in the bottom right-hand corner, you can see how that might be geographically, strategically important to someone to hold all that territory. So these are her parents. This is a early 20th century mural of them at Schlossburg, which is the picture that's my background, which I don't know if you guys were able to see it earlier. And together they had 4 children. They had Sibylla in 1512. They were married in 1510. They had Sibylla in 1512, Anna in 1515. And fun fact, her birthday is actually June 28th and not in September. And she shares her birthday with Henry VIII. And then Wilhelm in 1516 and their little sister Amalia in 1517. And this isn't a real picture of Amalia. I think I may have found a portrait of her as a teenager, but we don't really know what she looked like because there aren't any identified portraits of her. So this is just an unknown German noblewoman, basically. So tradition holds that Anna was born in Düsseldorf, and this is a sketch from 1629 of the castle. The castle suffered many fires over the centuries, including one in right around, I think it was Christmas of 1510. They were trying to smoke bacon down in the kitchen. It got out of hand and there was severe fire damage done to the castle. So it's possible that Anna was born in this castle, Düsseldorf Castle, but it's unlikely, but that's the tradition. She was probably more likely born in Schlossburg or in Cleves. And the only bit of this castle that's still standing, if you guys can see my cursor here, is this tower. That's it, if you go to Düsseldorf today. And then this is just an engraving of the Swan Castle, or Schloss Schwanenburg in Cleves. So this up here is the Swan Tower. Unfortunately, a combination of things led to this castle being destroyed and then rebuilt. It was used for a prison, or excuse me, as a prison for a period of time in the 1800s, and then it was completely destroyed during World War II. So when you go to visit, it's a very good likeness of the castle, but it is not the actual castle anymore. But they did rebuild the Swan Tower, but things like this Watergate down here are completely gone. So beginning in the mid-1520s, several marital alliances were made for the von der Mark children, for the 2 oldest girls, Sibylla and Anna, and then also for Wilhelm. Amalia was still a little young. So in 1526, Sibylla was engaged to the elector of Saxony, Johann Friedrich. And the Saxon elector, I think there were 11 electors at the time, but the electorate of Saxony was the most important, most powerful electorate within the Holy Roman Empire. So the electors would get together whenever it was time to decide upon who the new emperor would be, and they would vote, okay? So also in 1526, Anna was engaged to Francis of Lorraine, the Duke of Lorraine's son. And their marriage contract was de futuro. So there's 2 different types of marriage contracts. You can have de presenti, which means from the moment the contract is signed, you're basically husband and wife, or you can have de futuro, which means that there are certain conditions that have to be fulfilled in order to make the contract valid. And Anna was around 11 years old when this happened. Her brother Wilhelm was engaged to Anne of Lorraine as well, so there was a cross engagement. Now we were talking about Gelders before. You guys might remember I was showing that to you. And I'm sorry, Amalia never got engaged. Anyway, so the Gelders connection. So these are the twins, Philippa and Karl of Gelders. Duke Karl never had any children. His sister Philippa was the grandmother of both Francis and Anne of Lorraine. So the thought was that Anna's family would marry into Duke Carl's family, and then they would gain rights and possession of Gelders. The only problem with that was Anna's dad never finished paying the dowry money to the Duke of Lorraine, and so Duke Carl of Gelders said, you know what, never mind, let's call off this whole marriage thing. So there was never any final marital agreement between Anna's parents, either for Anna to marry the Duke of Lorraine's son, Francis, or for Anna's brother Wilhelm to marry the Duke of Lorraine's daughter, Anne. And there is a letter from 1535 that says that. So if we speed up to 1538, as we know, unfortunately, Queen Jane is deceased. Henry's looking for another wife. There were 4 women he was considering at the time: Christina of Denmark, who was the niece of the Holy Roman Emperor; Mary of Guise, who of course goes on to marry Henry's nephew; Amalia, and Anna. Now, the relationship between England and Cleves actually goes back quite a ways, and even starting as early as 1530, Anna's father was trying to see if Wilhelm could marry the Princess Mary. Of course, that didn't happen, but he was trying to arrange that. And Anna's family was very, very Catholic. I know that there's this belief that they were Protestant or Lutheran, and that's not really the case. Anna's older sister Sibylla did convert to Lutheranism, and her younger sister Amalia did, but neither Anna nor her brother Wilhelm ever converted to Lutheranism. They were both Catholics their entire lives. So at the same time, we were talking about the engagements being broken off with Duke Carl of Gelders' niece and nephew from Lorraine. Turns out that Charles V, the Holy Roman Emperor, has like 5 different claims to the Duchy of Gelders. He has one through his grandmother, Mary of Burgundy. Also, there were, his grandfather, Maximilian I, had made a couple of deals, I guess you could say, or contracts with Duke Carl of Gelders, saying, hey, I'll loan you this money, but when you die, that means I get control of the duchy. And as recently as the 1520s, Duke Carl made no fewer than 2 treaties with Charles saying, hey, yeah, when I die, Charles, you can have the Duchy of Gelders. However, Duke Carl had changed his mind and decided that he would leave the entire duchy to Wilhelm when Duke Carl dies, so Wilhelm being Anna's brother. So by June 1538, Duke Carl is dead. Wilhelm becomes the next Duke of Gelders. Charles V really does not like this, but he's figured out, you know what? This is a young man. He's all of maybe 22 years old. I will play nice with Duke Wilhelm, and maybe I can talk to Wilhelm's dad, Johann, and convince him to just give me back Gelders. In 1539, at the height of, or excuse me, when Cromwell was trying to find a new bride for Henry, in May of 1539, Charles V's beloved wife, Isabella of Portugal, died. The negotiations and discussions between Cromwell and Duke Wilhelm had just begun. Duke Wilhelm's father, Johann, died back in February. But the bulk of the discussions and negotiations for Anna to marry Henry VIII of England happened after Isabella of Portugal died, and happened over the summer of 1539, when Charles was in mourning and basically had secluded himself and removed himself from the world to a monastery. So more or less, Wilhelm and Thomas went behind Charles V's back to try and negotiate this marriage. And as we know, everything was fine. By the time Charles came out of seclusion, he was not happy with what was going on, but he decided to, you know, Henry's my friend, or at least I want to be friendly with him. We'll go ahead and let Anna leave the continent and do whatever she needs to do. So this here is the German version of what's called the beer pot document. And if you look down here, there's a little beer pot, and there will be a close-up of the very bottom here. But this is a copy of the marriage contract in German. It was executed in both German and Latin, and Anna did sign both copies of it. And so this is kind of the signature here. Here's Anna's signature. Here's the notarial symbol, and then here's the notarization by the imperial notary. What's important about the imperial notary is, you guys might recall that for a long time, Henry, or people believe that Henry was right when he said that Anna's marriage to him was invalid because she was married to Francis of Lorraine. Well, we've already seen that it was officially called off in 1535. And also when we look at this imperial notarization, remembering that Lorraine was also part of the Holy Roman Empire, that meant there was no impediment to the marriage. So they're good to go on their marriage. But Here is Anna's signature, and it says, Anna, born Duchess of Jülich, Cleves, and Berg, it says, haben dieses alles wird so sein, erkannt, mein Handschrift, whatever. Basically, it says, all of this is to be as it says, recognizable by my own handwriting. So that's Anna's signature there on the marital contract. And this is the passport that Charles V decided to issue to allow Anna to travel through his territories, because Anna had to cross through imperial territory, she had to cross through French territory, and then finally make it to English-held Calais. And we can see his signature at the bottom. And this is just a close-up of his seal. And then this is another contract that was signed by Henry's folks. You can see a whole bunch of names down here. Got Thomas Cromwell there. And I just wanted to take a minute to show this to you guys. Here's some more signatures. Charles, Duke of Suffolk, Thomas Cromwell, Thomas Audley looks like, Thomas, the Archbishop of Canterbury. There's Cromwell's signature up close. Now here's the cool part. Does anybody know what this is on the back of the seal here? This is Cromwell's seal. These are fingerprints in the wax from 1539. And I just think that's the coolest thing. And these could even be Cromwell's fingerprints, I don't know. So I just like to show that to people. But anyway. And then here we have Henry's marital contract. We've got the Tudor green and white. There's Henry's signature. And here is the colorized version. And there's a close-up of the H showing Henry. So 1540, Anna finally gets to England after some delays in crossing over to Calais. It's not really known how much English she speaks at this point. Her brother Wilhelm was educated in French and Latin, and if Anna did have any exposure to foreign languages, it probably would have been one of those two. Her family did have a lot of ties to the Burgundian court, and they were related to the Burgundians. So, and England was just kind of out in the middle of nowhere and not really that important at the time, and so she wouldn't have had a reason to learn English. She could have learned some on her way to Calais. She might have learned some while she was there. It's difficult to tell because it's not really noted very often when translators were present. So January 1st, New Year's Day, there's this idea that Henry came to visit Anna and he was horrified by what he saw and he turned away and didn't give her her gift. And that's been the story for about 500 years. And that's not what really happened. So that story was made up for the annulment, and we're slowly getting towards the reasoning for the annulment. But that story was made up for the annulment, which those proceedings took place in late June 1540 to early July 1540, because there's no mention of it before then. According to the German account, which was written a couple days afterwards, Henry came to Anna. He gave her a crystal goblet that was gilt and had diamonds and rubies inlaid in it. He spent the entire evening with her. Again, there's not really any reference to whether there was a translator, if they were able to communicate with each other, but he spent the entire evening with her. And then he and his men went to a different place that wasn't very far from Rochester to stay overnight. And they came back in the morning and had breakfast with her. So he liked her, according to the Germans. In the meantime, Wilhelm is going behind Henry's back and the emperor's back, and he's trying to create an alliance with Francis I of France. Francis I has a niece named Jeanne d'Albret. It's his niece through his sister Marguerite, who's Queen of Navarre, because Wilhelm is realizing that even though the emperor's kind of playing nice with him about Wilhelm giving back Gelders, Wilhelm knows that the emperor is eventually going to have to start a war with him to get it back. So Wilhelm's thinking, you know what? If I have one brother-in-law is the Elector of Saxony, one brother-in-law is the King of England, and I've got good ties to the French king, I'm going to be kind of unstoppable. So he didn't tell Henry what he was doing. And if you look at the timeline of the marital negotiations with Wilhelm and Francis for Francis' niece, Jeanne d'Albret, he pretty much concludes the engagement proceedings at around the same time that Anna's marriage is annulled. So all of this is happening in the background, okay? And that's just pictures of, you've got Henry, Francis, Johann, Friedrich of Saxony, Isabella's husband, and then Wilhelm, of course, against the emperor. So Henry, who I think is a bit more astute in some ways than he's typically given credit for. Henry doesn't like wars, or at least he doesn't want to expose himself to being attacked by the emperor. So the only way to get out of it is he's got to get out of this marriage. He's got to figure out, how can I undo this marriage without a divorce? How can I protect England? So in comes Thomas Wriothesley. Thomas Wriothesley and a few others were commissioned to create the secret council, and they were to investigate ways to have the marriage to Anna annulled. And they came up with 3 different grounds. The first one being that Henry didn't consummate the marriage to her, and that's where the rumor that she was ugly came from. It was that he was not attracted enough to her, so he couldn't consummate the marriage with her. The second one was that she was someone else's wife, Francis of Lorraine's wife, and as we've seen, there are a couple different reasons why that simply wasn't true. And the third reason was that his princely heart was so pure that even though he agreed on the outside to marry this woman, he knew that there were too many impediments on the inside, so he didn't inwardly consent to the marriage. So those were the 3 grounds that they came up with. The next trouble was, though, how were they going to prove it? Who could they ask to say, yes, all this is true? So Wriothesley and the other members of the secret council draft an attestation in, I believe it was late June, early July of 1540. Thomas Cromwell is arrested and thrown in the Tower, and they're still trying to figure out, how can we get proof that this is what really happened, that Henry and Anna never consummated their marriage, so it'd be eligible for an annulment, and that there are all these impediments. So they go to Thomas Cromwell and they say, hey, just so you know, you're going to get your head chopped off, okay? Charles Brandon, Henry's buddy, and Thomas Wriothesley go to Cromwell and say, there's an act of attainder passed against you. That was passed yesterday. You're going to get dead. Hey, can you sign this attestation for us, spelling out all the errors with Henry's marriage and how they had a horrible relationship? Cromwell signs it. And that attestation has every single bad detail about the marriage in it that we've seen. Also, if you look at the depositions that were given for the convocation, which was kind of the trial for the annulment, that's where a lot of our rumors come from. So then Cromwell, after he signs this attestation, dashes off a letter that has almost the exact same information in it and signs it, mercy, 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 Thomas Cromwell. So to me, that seems like someone who is trying to avoid not getting their head chopped off. He didn't want to die. So that's a great way to do it. Put someone in a tough spot, say, hey, I need you to sign this, make this become a legal document. And also you need to write it in your own words as well. And that's what happened. So Cromwell was eventually beheaded despite him attempting to appease Henry. Anna's marriage was of course annulled, and Henry very swiftly afterward married Catherine Howard. This is the letter that Anna wrote to her brother Wilhelm. She prevaricated for a few days before writing to Wilhelm because she was horribly embarrassed and upset about the whole thing. She was not expecting the marriage to be annulled. She would have been allowed to have a counselor. At least her German advisors asked her if she wanted to have anyone present at the convocation. And she said no, because she trusted Henry and she knew that there was nothing wrong with their marriage. Unfortunately, that didn't work out for her. When she first found out about the annulment, she broke down crying and shrieking and bawling her eyes out. And Charles Brandon, who was one of the people who went to tell her what was going on, writes a letter back to Henry saying, hey, yeah, we told her, but the German translator did a really bad job and she freaked out and cried. So we're going to write it down in German now to make it easier for her to understand. So then they go back and write it in German. I'm sure that was an attempt to be gracious and give her a moment to compose herself. But she spent as much time, or took as much time as she could, delaying telling Wilhelm what had happened. And at this point, Wilhelm is firmly engaged to Jeanne d'Albret. Like, they're not married yet because she's, 10 or 11, but they are for sure engaged. And so this is the letter that she wrote on, I think, right around July 11th of 1540 to tell him that the marriage was annulled. And she still signs it as Anna, the born Duchess of Cleves, Jülich, Gelders, and Berg and Zutphen. So Gelders and Zutphen were part of that territory that Charles V wanted. And here's a close-up of her signature here. A little bit different. This is a little bit different than on her previous documents that she signed. So now Wilhelm only has Francis and Johann Friedrich to go against Charles V. Henry's out. Within days of the annulment, Henry marries Catherine Howard. Now, it's often thought that Henry had his eye on Catherine the whole time. I don't really think that was the case. I think what happened with Catherine is that she made the perfect victim for Henry. She didn't meaningfully have parents. Her uncle was the powerful Duke of Norfolk, who was now Henry's right-hand man after the downfall of Cromwell. And Henry had to do something to make it impossible for him to be forced into taking Anna back as his lawfully wedded wife. By marrying Catherine, who again, perfect victim, perfect person for him to marry, in order for Henry to be forced into taking back Anna as his bride, they'd have to undo the marriage with Catherine and then make Henry take her back. So by the time all of this news reaches Wilhelm, Anna's brother, first of all, Wilhelm can't do much because he's low-key preparing for war with the emperor. And secondly, how is he supposed to force someone in a different kingdom to abandon their new wife and take his sister back? Can't really do that. One of my favorite moments or favorite interactions between Anna and Catherine was when Anna went to court, I believe it was right around New Year's of 1541, to finally see Catherine Howard as queen and also to bring some gifts. There's made mention of how Anna prostrated herself before the new queen and that was her accepting her new position. I think that Anna was very clever, and I think in part that's what she was trying to get across, but I think she was also trying really hard to get underneath Catherine's skin and to make her a bit uncomfortable by being as subservient to Catherine as she was. So I just like to throw that out there. It's always interesting to have kind of perspective on people's behavior. So in the late summer to early fall of 1541, things kind of start to go sideways for Catherine Howard. By November of 1541, she has been taken away. She is, we find out months later, she's going to have her head chopped off too, through an act of attainder, and that marriage is going to be annulled. So from late 1541 to early 1542, Anna and her brother really thought that there would be a chance for her to marry Henry again and become Queen of England again and reinstate the alliances between England and Cleves. And this image is from a prayer book of hers. Trying to figure out where my mouse is. There it is. So here we have England, and here is the escarbuncle of Cleves, and then there's this pretty little A with a little crown over it. So this image is from Anna's prayer book. Also, they had, I think the Bishop of Lunde had gone and brought back new evidence that would show that Henry could lawfully marry Anna, but he just avoided the question. So in 1543, or by 1543, Wilhelm is now married to the French king's niece, to Jeanne d'Albret. They were married, I think, in 1541 or 1542. The Gelders War is finally happening because Charles V is tired of trying to play nice with Wilhelm. And at the same time, Charles is trying to get Henry to side with him, you know, to, hey, I need you to fight with me against Gelders. I need to get this property. You and I are friends. Can we please go do this? And Henry, once again, doesn't want to be dragged into a war. And so he keeps putting it off and putting it off. But the rough part is Anna's still there in England, so he could marry her at any moment. So to solve that, he marries Catherine Parr smack in the middle of the early part of the Gelders War in summer of 1543. This could be a love match. I'm not saying that it wasn't, but I'm also saying that the timing's really convenient because by marrying Catherine Parr, when the Gelders War was heating up between Wilhelm and the emperor, what Henry did is he put himself in a position to alienate neither country. By marrying Catherine Parr, he couldn't marry Anna, so he couldn't really himself with Cleves, and also he didn't have to make any formal declaration that he was with or against the emperor. Pretty clever. Unfortunately for Wilhelm, now that he only had himself really to fight against the emperor, unfortunately the Elector of Saxony was off trying to do other things, and that winds up going south later on in 1547. Francis I of France doesn't really care about Gelders or really helping Wilhelm. Wilhelm had to fight the emperor all by himself, and it did not go well. The cities of Jülich and Düren were not destroyed, but it was really bad. There was new military technology that was being used that hadn't been used before. Charles V had these massive long guns, and they were just able to completely obliterate city walls. Like, you know, you got a nice flat city wall and this giant cannonball coming at it. So Wilhelm loses the war. As a result of the war, he and Charles enter into what's called the Treaty of Venlo, where Wilhelm says, okay, Charles V, you can have Gelders back. I'm sorry. Also, I will annul my marriage to you, Francis I's niece, and marry your niece, Maria, instead. And this is an engraving showing down here in this corner, the bottom right, that's Wilhelm. And here's the emperor seated. So that's really what it was. It was all based around the Gelders War. After Wilhelm lost the Gelders War, their mother Maria is said to have died from the sorrow and shock of what happened to the castle, to the main castle in Jülich. And then in 1547, Anna's sister Sibylla and Sibylla's husband Johann Friedrich lost in their battle against the emperor. And so the von der Mark family, Anna's last name is von der Mark, really was brought to its knees by the end of the 1540s. So I've done a lot of talking and I would be excited to answer some questions. So I'm going to leave the screen sharing as soon as I figure